Thank you, Presiding Officer. I joined the committee in September last year, so that was after the evidence-taking sessions had taken place, but before the publication of the report. However, I have been a member of the Parliament since 2007, and I think it's fair to say that the impact of Brexit on the Parliament is clear for all to see. And just as a little corrective to Alec Rowley and Alec Cole-Hamilton, who are trying to portray, I don't know why they want to excuse what the Tory government does, but they do. When the Labour Party were in control of this place with the Liberal Democrats, and when there was a Labour government, they may remember the Jack McConnell report that was commissioned that showed there was widespread ignorance and indifference across the whole of Whitehall to this institution. That was under a Labour government during the time that Labour were in power here as well. It's often been said that power devolved is power retained, and whilst that's always been true, it's also true that when the UK was a member of the EU, there was a degree of protection for the rights of parliaments like ours situated within larger EU states, and that provided a framework of intergovernmental relationships that more or less worked as intended. Though, of course, my preference has always been for Scotland to be an EU member state in its own right. And just to say, when I say that I'm an internationalist to my bones, I don't mean, as Alec Cole-Hamilton does, he's an internationalist until Brexit happens and then he gives up on Brexit. I oppose Brexit and I oppose Brexit now. Today, though, it's quite clear that, as expressed in conclusions of Part 2 of the committee's report, that devolution, as it says, looks very different outside of the EU compared to when the UK was a member state. And the committee has noted that there was considerable clarity, consistency and consensus in how the regulatory environment was managed within the UK prior to EU exit. Whereas after EU exit, there has been significant disagreement between the devolved institutions and the UK government regarding how the regulatory environment should be managed within the UK. And I have to say, I think Jamie Green is utterly deluded if he thought that the UK Parliament would provide a proper scrutiny of EU legislation. There's probably not an academic that he could cite that would back up that point of view. The UK government has not provided that scrutiny in the past and has done as much as it can to undermine Scotland's ability to do that. I would also add that, as well as a change in the legislative framework, there has been a change in the attitude, as has been mentioned already, of the UK government. We now have the muscular unionism, which is now the norm. Actually, very redolent, for those that can remember it, of the mid-1990s, before the Tory government was thrown out then. That was when it was the most strident and least tolerant. And I would also add that, as well as that change, we have seen, of course, what's been mentioned by many members, the willingness to override, for example, the Sewel Convention. And I remember the vow that told us there would be the strongest parliament, devolved parliament in the world. Gordon Brown told us, David Cameron told us, and part of that was to have enshrined in law the Sewel Convention. It moved on within a very short period of time to the Tory Westminster government saying before the Supreme Court that the Sewel Convention was merely a self-denying ordinance, something they could decide if they wanted to observe or not. That's how quickly devolution has changed under this Conservative government. And much of the problem, as I've mentioned as well, comes down to the ad hoc nature of the British Constitution, where conventions and general principles apply until, of course, they don't apply. There's nothing hard and fast about how the UK operates, and though we're used to that by now, we should not put up with it. The idea we should normalise that one of the most important offices of state in the UK, the Foreign Secretary, is just somebody plucked from elsewhere without being elected. Or, of course, the proroguing of Parliament, or the various other rules, which are not really rules. The UK used to always say it was a model democracy, the mother of all parliaments, and it supported the separation of powers. But at the same time, you had one position, the Lord Chancellor, who was in the executive, the judiciary and the legislature. There's never been separation of powers in the UK Parliament. And since the independence referendum, we've been repeatedly told that we are the most powerful devolved parliament in the world. And we've heard from the Cabinet Secretary, I think 11 times, they've run roughshod over the Sewel Convention. In 2016, David Cameron claimed that the Scotland Bill, once enacted, would deliver this very strong, powerful devolved parliament. And speaking to the House of Commons Committee just last July, Rishi Sunak said, "I think actually the Scottish Government, as far as I can recall, when I last looked at this, was probably the most powerful devolved assembly anywhere in the world." It's as if they say often enough and loud enough, people will eventually believe them. But that last quote from Rishi Sunak gives the game away. I think, as far as I can recall, when I last looked at this, probably. I don't know if you could have caveated it any heavier than he did. Because the reality is, it's simply not true. This Parliament can and is being overruled by Westminster. Section 35, the real effect of Section 35 being exercised is the chilling effect it will have on this Parliament and the Government when it considers what future legislation it wants to take forward for the people of Scotland. And that would apply to any party in this place as well. And despite all the warm words about how powerful the Parliament is, the Tories in this Parliament have cheered the UK Government on every step of the way. They don't see themselves as representatives of this devolved institution. They see themselves as agents of a Tory party, a Tory Government in Westminster. And sure, that's a fundamental betrayal of the electorate that sent them here in the first place. They have cheered every step of the way when we've had the UK Government riding roughshod over the democratic elected expressed views of the Scottish people. In the meantime, can I say, President Officer, I support the report, I echo the concerns it expresses, and I commend the recommendations to the Parliament.
Thank you, Mr Brown.